All right, guys, welcome back to another video. My name is CFI Munden. First of all, Brenda, thanks for sending me this video. I know you're watching this right now, like, what the heck? It'd probably be so weird just watching a video and then all of a sudden your name pops up. So I thought that was kind of funny. But she just sent me this video, and I definitely want to take a look at this with you guys. I don't know how I've never seen this. And yeah, thanks for joining my Patreon. For those of you guys who just joined that yesterday, that's really nice, and it's going to help me make content in the future. So let's go ahead and watch this together. And I want to tie this back to the book Stick and Rudder. It's a book that I've been reading by Wolfgang. I read it a long time ago, but I was a brand new student. I didn't understand half of it, but now I'm a CFI, and I feel like I have a better grasp on that book.
It's a high-performance airplane, a turbo Bonanza, I believe. He's taken off from a very short runway, surrounded by trees at a high-density altitude.
All right, so let's do it.
Traffic Bonanza 3430 Victor departure.
Chris does an amazing job analyzing exactly what happens here, so I'm not going to get into those kind of details, but I'm going to provide links that you have to check out. For now, what I want to simply do is watch and react to it.
Airspeed is alive. Backed. Engine's in the green. Backed.
So clearly Chris knows he's facing a bit of a challenge as he starts this takeoff roll, but he knows his airplane, and he did his math, and he knows the numbers say it can be done, but the question is, will it be done? So after rotation here, he's committed, and you can see things aren't going as planned.
That's just a little scary. Brittle. Oh boy. Wow. Okay, things we are not doing again.
So that couldn't have been any closer. Let's just back it up and check this out. Look at those treetops. I mean, the wingtips are definitely below those. So he just squeaked it through that gap. He managed to instinctually turn just slightly left there to find that one gap that he had, and he made it through. And he fought the urge to pull back, which I think a lot of people would have done. And then he would have mushed into those trees for sure. So kudos for flying right on the edge, man. He got it out, but just barely.
Okay, Chris.
That was close. That was real close. The first time I watched that, I honestly thought he was going to hit the trees. He had to have been probably 5 feet away from those trees.
So in Chris's article where he breaks it down, you'll see a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on in the conversation thread.
And I tried to find the link in the description. I couldn't find it anywhere. So yeah, I don't want to be super hard on this guy because this guy is way more experienced than me. This was 10 years ago. This guy is probably, well, I know he is because I watched his videos when I was a student pilot. And these are one of the mistakes that I feel like a lot of people make, and you just like, wow, like you said, I'm never doing that again. And I feel like if we're all being honest, we all have moments like this in our career where we're like, that was really dumb, I got really lucky, and I just learned a valuable lesson there. So I want to be gentle on this video, and instead of beating up the pilot and being like, what an idiot, because a lot of the comments are pretty brutal. A lot of the comments are like, what an idiot, he should know better, there's this and this, and blah, blah, blah. We're simply taking this for what it is and then applying some lessons to it and analyzing the video a little bit further. So for those of you guys who aren't a pilot, which there is a shocking amount of you that are watching my channel now and they're not pilots. I think 80% are not pilots, which is really awesome. I mean, that's really cool to see so many people interested in aviation and jumping on board. So I'm gonna break things down a little bit. A short field takeoff is typically what we use when we're taking off from a short field. Usually, depending on your plane, this includes putting your feet on the brakes, flaps 10 degrees, full power, getting maximum RPMs, and then releasing, and then rotating, usually about the same speed, but climbing out at a speed which is called VX. For a Cessna 172, it's 62. So our normal rotation speed is around 72 to 74 knots, depending on your weight and density altitude. And a VX climb out is going to be, where's my airplane? It is going to be 62. So to give you an example, when you're climbing out in a short field, your nose is going to be, your angle of attack is going to be higher. It's significantly higher, like when you're doing it, compared to a VY rotation, which is going to be a little bit lower. So instead of being like this in a VX, you're going to be like that. Or in this case, it's going to be VX. High density altitude, basically if you were to take a box of air molecules and if it was a high density altitude day, it means those air molecules are spread further apart. And what I'm trying to tell you is that means that our performance is going to be worse. It's going to be harder for us to rotate. Our climb out's going to be worse. So this is risky. Okay, so he has a short field that he needs to take off from, and he has high density altitude, and he has obstacles at the end of the runway, okay?
Now from a very short runway, surrounded by trees at a high density altitude.
All right, so.
And I'm also, one of the things that I'm looking at here, and like I said, this guy has probably analyzed this video himself, this pilot, multiple times, and he was like, wow, I should have done this differently, or this was a mistake. But I'm looking at the winds, and if you guys, for non-pilots or even pilots alike, let me remind you guys that taking off in a tailwind is significant. I was looking at the POH yesterday with one of my students, and in the Cessna 172 POH, it says to increase your takeoff distance by like 10% or some 8 to 10% for every 2 knots of tailwind. So even though this could be a crosswind, there still could be a tailwind factor in it. If not, it is a crosswind. But it definitely doesn't look like.
Chris does an amazing job.
I don't know if this is a headwind or not.
Analyzing it.
And then the windsock comes up, which we'll look at in a second. You guys tell me if you think this is a headwind or a tailwind. But I'm immediately thinking, okay, are you taking off with a tailwind or a headwind? What does this look like? Or is it just a crosswind?
Exactly what happens here.
I'm assuming that he's taking off with the proper wind, the runway. I'd be shocked if this guy just missed critical information like winds. People rarely do that.
So I'm not going to
on
get
purpose
into those kind of details, but I'm going to provide links that you have to check out. For now, what I want to simply do is watch and react to it.
Airspeed is alive. Backed.
Check the
Engines
windsock.
in the green. Backed.
So clearly Chris knows he's facing
And I'm
a bit of
like,
a challenge
I'm looking at these trees over here to see if I can get any indications of the wind.
as he starts this takeoff roll. But he knows his airplane, and he did his math.
So there's the windsock right
He
there.
knows the numbers say it can be done, but the question is, will it be done?
What do you guys think? Do you guys think this is a tail? I literally can't tell because every time I pause the video,
He's
it's
facing a bit of a
blurry.
challenge as he starts this takeoff roll.
Look on the right.
But he knows his airplane, and he did his math, and he knows the numbers say it can be done, but the question is, will it be done?
It kind of, I don't know, kind of does, but I can't really tell. I can't give you a sure answer.
So
So
after
right
my
here,
finishing
this is the moment that I want to talk about. So this is a really bad sign, and he knows it. Once you start your rotation, okay, you still have, he has about, I mean, he rotated halfway down the runway, and he's already getting a stall horn, which means he's reaching that critical angle of attack, and he's almost getting to the point to where, he's going to stall the aircraft. So the only option is here to put the nose down and to regain that airspeed, even if it's for a shortened amount of time, and you really don't have a choice. And every semi-experienced pilot knows this.
Committed, and you can see things aren't going as planned.
So I think he instinctually puts the nose down here because he feels that stall horn.
That's just a little scary. Little.
And then he shoots the gap in between these trees. And I think one of the things that I noticed that I don't know if very many people noticed was that I was like, those are weird trees. And then I realized that they were cut. And I think that the thing that saved him was that somebody cut these trees down right here. And they gave you this gap because this has happened before.
Oh boy. Wow.
But I mean, he barely dodges those trees.
Okay, things we are not doing again.
So that couldn't have been any closer.
And yeah, so what I'm looking at here is his
You can
pitch
see
attitude, and he gets the stall horn.
aren't going.
And this is the correct reaction. So if you're on rotation and you have an obstacle, well, let me tie it back to Wolfgang's book. But the correct reaction is to obviously put the nose down because you need to gain that airspeed. You need to get that airspeed up in order to trade it for the altitude that you're going to need to clear those trees.
As planned.
And I think the inexperienced pilot here would have just hung on for the ride and would have increased their angle of attack more and more to the point to where they induce a stall. And he's very lucky for this gap here.
That's just a little scary.
And he instinctually moves towards the gap and then puts the nose down because he knows that he can use this moment right here to gain that airspeed just enough to get him over those trees.
Little. Oh boy. Wow. Okay, things we are not doing again.
So survivable. So the moral of the story here is just because the performance calculations say you can do it, doesn't mean you will be able to do it. I mean, you need to.
There's also something to take into factor here is that when that performance data was given to you in the POH, that plane was new. And at least this is what my DPs have always told me, is that you need to add a safety margin to that. So whatever numbers you get, increase those numbers by like 10% or something. Some people say as much as 50. That's a little extensive. That's a little bit too much for me, in my opinion. 50% is insane, but I don't know. If you're flying a real crap box, like maybe it is 50%. But maybe think about adding 10 to 20% for a takeoff roll. So if it says that you need at least 1,000 feet to take off on a runway in these certain conditions, maybe add 200 feet onto that. Okay, just to give yourself that cushion. Because when at least this is what I was told, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is just something that circulates around schools that I think we should all question, but it sounds valid, is that they say to increase those margins because that performance data was performed on an aircraft where it was brand new and it wasn't beat up at a flight school. It didn't have 10 engine overhauls, engine replaced, right? That's how it was. So that's just something to consider. Things get older, they perform less efficiently over time.
The airplane perfectly. You need ideal conditions exactly matching whatever the conditions were supposed to be in the charts. So the reality of it is most airplanes are...
Also, I want to kind of bring up a topic of conversation here. I always see ground effect as free energy and free speed, because we know that when we're in ground effect, we have less induced drag and we're able to build up that speed. So when we rotate off the runway, and let's pretend this is the runway. When we rotate off, we can pitch the nose up and then use the ground effect in order to gain that airspeed. And you can get a significant amount of airspeed from just being in ground effect for like 10 seconds. Now, did he have 10 seconds here? It's hard to say. But that's something to think about too, is that I feel like a lot of us are very willing to spend that free energy quick and just to get rid of it because we want to get off the ground, which is totally applicable. And I think that's necessary. But however, I think that ground effect is free energy and you could use that even if it's for a couple of seconds in order to help you clear an obstacle. And I was thinking about this in my head, ironically, because I was thinking about clearing obstacles, which were telephone poles at this airport that I fly out of. And I did a little experiment. I maintained a ground effect for as long as I could with 10 degrees of flaps. And you're supposed to rotate at 7.4 knots in the Cessna 172. Or if it's short field or soft field, you're rotating at VX, right? 62. But I got up to like 90 knots in ground effect. I think I was even faster than 90 knots in ground effect. I think I was like 90, 95. I was focused on, just maintaining that ground effect, but I was cruising above the ground. And then when you pitch up with 10 degree flaps to VX, like you are going to get a significant amount of altitude. Now, granted, this was a low density altitude day and it was cold, and we didn't have any winds or anything, but that was an example to me of like, ooh, ground effect is free energy, and you could use that to your advantage sometimes. And sometimes I think pilots are too willing to give that away too quick, but I don't know. I noticed like more experienced pilots, they rotate, maintain ground effect no matter what, gain that speed, and then they rotate again after that. Okay, so I want to read this. Well, we could finish watching this
10
together.
plus years old that we're flying these days. And, unless you're a multi-thousand-hour pilot, you're not going to be flying perfectly. So the odds of you getting it done exactly as the book says...
Give yourself a safety margin, guys.
And Chris is a very experienced pilot. And again, he does an amazing job breaking down everything that went on here. So I'm not going to get into the details. But at the end of the day, add a margin. So personally...
There you go.
I think I've kind of always ballparked 50%. But I'm going to officially say at this point, I'm going to add a 50% buffer to the performance numbers for my personal minimums for any takeoff calculations that I do.
So one time I did a check ride with a DPE, and I told him that I was adding a 50% safety margin on all my numbers for performance data. And he kind of just looked at me like, okay, got it. And he kind of gave me this feeling that was just a little bit too much. And he's like, why 50%? And he was asking me, why are you adding 50%? And I was like, oh, this is why. This other pilot told me that this is why we add 50%. He's like, okay. And he seemed kind of skeptical. So at that point I was like, is that too high? And he was just like, I don't know. I didn't really get an answer out of him. So let me know what you guys think. Is 50% too high to add on? Because that's a significant amount. But it does give you a nice cushion, a nice safety margin. And we are considering that these planes have been running to the ground a lot and they've been, the conditions aren't always perfect. So, maybe I'll rethink that and go back to my 50%. Because right now I'm at like 20 to 30%.
Going forward. So I'm just a private pilot.
Okay, Flight Chops, thanks for posting this video, man. I'll link you below. How many subscribers do you have now? You have 362. Nice. I remember watching this guy's videos a long time ago when I was a student. Okay, so let's end this video with reading this chapter from Stick and Rudder. It's Wolfgang's book, and I was thinking about how to clear an obstacle, and then I ironically started reading this book, and then it talks about this moment right here. And I just want to be very clear. I'm not telling you to do this, okay? I'm not saying that you should do this. I'm saying if you want to, go talk to your CFI about this and refer to this book and have a conversation about it, okay? But don't be like, some YouTuber told me to maintain ground effect and then rotate at the last minute and then you run into telephone poles. You know what I mean? So I'm not telling you to do that. The roller coaster, okay, so this is page 85 and it's the roller coaster law. The roller coaster law is important also in takeoff. You know how right after breaking free, a pilot usually prefers to drop his nose a bit and shoot along level for a second or two before he starts a climb. But okay, so that's what I was talking about. We put that nose down into ground effect and then we shoot up. Okay, but why does he do that? The engine is giving him so much energy every second. By the roller coaster law, he can take that energy either in the form of additional speed or additional height, but he can't have both. Altitude is money in the bank. Speed is money in the pocket. And the first thing he wants is to have, and the first thing he wants is to have a little money in the pocket before he starts worrying about his bank account. And while he builds up excess speed, he knows that he could, if he chose, convert that excess speed into altitude at any time simply by pointing the nose up. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. You build that energy, that speed, point the nose up. You're trading that speed for altitude. If the takeoff is from a small field surrounded by tall obstructions, the working of the roller coaster effect can be quite dramatic. If an experienced pilot is at the flight controls, if the pilot, God, reading is so, I'm telling you, every time I start reading, English turns into my second language. The inexperienced pilot has a strong tendency to point the nose up steeply and simply hope that the airplane will climb out. But it is easy to overdo this by trying to get too much altitude too quickly, to kill one's speed and stall perhaps 50 feet above the ground. The experienced pilot will therefore point his nose up only as high as absolutely necessary to clear obstructions. In fact, if the takeoff is from a very tight field, he will of 10 point the nose ship actually at the obstructions, maybe half the height of the trees. This does not help the airplane, gain height, but it does help it gain speed. And the experienced pilot does not worry because he knows, without thinking about it, that speed and height are two forms of the same thing. And for various reasons, he prefers to have that thing in the form of speed. And he knows that he can always, at the last moment, convert speed into height by pulling the nose up. The airplane will then zoom and clear these obstructions. Such a zoom may take most of the ship's excess speed away from it, so that it arrives over the treetops, all slowed up and nearly stalled. The inexperienced pilot in this situation will hang on with a stick well back and wait for his engine gradually to give him new speed, for he is afraid of the ground, afraid to lose any precious altitude. The experienced pilot will not try to stall along in this fashion. He knows that it would take too long to get new speed from his engine, and that it would thus mean a period of flying slow and low. He knows too that the gustiness of all air near the ground might easily cause a stall, and with not enough altitude underneath the airplane for recovery, that might mean a disaster. What the experienced pilot does, therefore, is to nose down a bit once he has passed the trees and get back a reasonable amount of speed by sacrificing a little bit of height, even though that may mean going down into the field next to the ground once more, so that the onlooker would see the airplane suddenly charging straight for the trees, then doing a jump, and then dipping beyond the trees and disappearing from sight, only to reappear a quarter minute later. Now, in a healthy and gradual climb. Okay, all of which is pretty obvious if you just think it over once. So that was kind of like the moment where it clicked for me. It was like, okay, because I was just in bed just thinking about this scenario for some reason. And I was like, this makes sense if I build up airspeed, put the nose down towards the obstacle, pitch up, slow down, but I trade that for height, and then I put the nose back down again, and then I'm playing that trading game, right? So basically, this is what's happening. And like I said, I'm not saying to do this. I'm saying this is, according to Wolfgang, what an experienced pilot does. Let's pretend that this is a 50-foot obstacle. We're rotating down the runway, or we're coming down the runway. We rotate, pitch up, maintain that ground effect. We point, and this is not to scale, okay? So I'm not saying to do it like this, but you point that nose down, gain airspeed, and then pitch up, clear the obstacle, and then at this point, you have a high angle of attack, you're getting close to that stall speed, and you're getting slow. So you have to put the nose down to gain that airspeed, and then you climb away once again, okay? So that's the roller coaster effect. So I want to create a conversation about this. What would you guys have done? What would you guys do in this situation that Chris Palmer posted? And do you think Wolfgang is correct when he says that in this scenario, he would at least pitch the nose down for ground effect and then pitch the nose up? All right, because I noticed that there's some criticism to Wolfgang and people are very skeptical about Wolfgang's book. So I want to, instead of just being like, Wolfgang's so right here, introduce a conversation into this video. But Flight Chops, thanks for posting this. Chris Palmer, thanks for posting this. I'll link you guys both below. And let me know what you guys think, all right? Thank you for my Patreon supporters. I love seeing you guys hop in there and helping to support this channel. If you guys want personal lessons out of Boise, Idaho, email me at cfimonday@gmail.com. See ya.